Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the upper room and Rosh Codesh Kislev, Benjamin. We'll go ahead and get started. I know Michael went to go get his shofar and somebody else has just showed up, but we'll begin anyway. We are back here with the new backdrop and the new studio look. So everything's all done and ready. Hopefully it's coming through all right. Welcome. And welcome to those who are Facebook Living with us. Trying to buy a little time and let them get up here before we really get into this. So I know that there are at least two people downstairs on their way up. So there's most of what we'll talk about tonight is a repeat of the information since we've gone through this cycle past a year. We've done Kislev. So this will be some of the same material, aspects of the month that we'll cover again. But there is a new bit that I've included. It was stuff that was part of the study previously that led to some of what I shared before. This time I'll do a little sharing of that little bit and kind of maybe get a little bit deeper understanding of those things and how I've come to the understanding I did on that stuff. So buy a little bit more time waiting. I know we have one person down there, at least one person down there on their way up. But, well, I guess what we can do is we'll go ahead and get started, and because we have some new people here, and I don't know if we have anyone new Facebook Living with us, I'll cover what it is that we're doing and why. I kind of thought we've gone over that many times, and to save time, I was going to cut that back, but it's not really fair if there are people who are unfamiliar with what's going on here to exclude them from knowing why we're doing this and all that. So, family, welcome. But before we get started, since it looks like we're not a full house, but we're enough to get going now, we'll open in a word of prayer. Father, we give thanks to you for this day that you have made, this time and this occasion that you have set apart. We just ask that you would come and join with us in this time of acknowledgement and celebration of what you have ordained for us to recognize. We just ask that you would open our minds to know and understand what it is that you have for us. In Yeshua's name, amen. Amen. Okay, so to begin with, my name is Mark Falstead. If you don't know who I am, whether Facebook Live or local here, I had posted a notice that we were coming up to do this a little while ago, so that everyone would be updated and aware that this was going to happen. Tonight was the night, and in that I included something I should have done a long time ago. I don't know why I didn't think about it. Is an invitation if you'd like to contact me for conversation, for questions, for comments. Whatever you'd like, included an invite to friend me on Facebook, since this is a Facebook event. Most of the people participating are on Facebook, but even those in-house, you're free to friend me on Facebook as well, and we can talk, we can communicate through that way. It's just a convenient venue in order to do that stuff. So if you need to write it down, I should be easy to find on Facebook. I can't imagine that there's more than one Mark Falstead. If it's spelled correctly, it's a pretty unusual name. So we'll go ahead and get started. So to begin with, what we're doing here is acknowledging Rosh Codesh, which means new moon, the head of the month. And the reason for this, we get in Numbers 10, 13 through 28, is our marching orders, which gives us each month, gives us the division of the tribes assigned to each month. I guess I'll cover, there's another way that this gets ascribed, depending on what school of thought you use. This is the one that we go by. Has been assigned by the marching orders from Numbers 10, 13 through 28, in order of the months in that way. But some people ascribe a tribe by the order of birth to the months. We don't hold to that. I'm not going to judge anybody who does. It's just not what we do. So that's the reason for the orders we go by. So this month of Kislev is ascribed to Benjamin. And in Numbers 10:10, we read about the instruction or commandment to observe this time, this occasion of the new moon. It says that also in the day of your gladness and your appointed feasts, and at the beginning of your months, which this is, you shall blow the trumpets over your burnt offerings and over your sacrifices of your peace offerings, and they shall be a memorial for you before your God. And in Numbers 28:11, it says, at the beginning of your months you shall present a burnt offering to the Lord, 2 young bulls. It goes on to describe what you're to offer. We see in Psalms 81:3 through 4, blow the trumpet at the time of the new moon, at the full moon, on your solemn feast days, for this is a statute for Israel, a law of the God of Jacob. Okay, so we can see that this was something God instituted, instructed for observance. But yes, it's true, the instructions given were for the Levites to observe. Does not exclude the rest of the population and the people from the invitation to celebrate as well. God is not an exclusive individual where only certain people are invited to celebrate with him. The mandates on what to do were given to the Levites, but everyone was free and welcomed and did observe some form of acknowledgement of the new moon. So we don't have a temple right now, but it doesn't mean that we cannot participate with God in the celebration of this occasion that he has set aside. So it brings up the question then, what is we as non-Levitical priests, not performing the Levitical priesthood, what can we do and how can we participate in the celebration and acknowledgement? And I go to 1 Samuel 20:18 as an example of some form of what we can do and what was being done in the time of David, at the time of King Saul. So this is before David was king as yet. And I'll kind of give you the summary of what's going on here because I only put in a short caption of the verse, and I'll explain it, what brings us to this point. So what's going on here is David and Jonathan, which is King Saul's son, they're really good friends. They're hanging out, and David is explaining to Jonathan that Jonathan's father, King Saul, wants to kill him. And Jonathan's like, no way, my dad loves you. You're like family, you're like a son to him, you'd never try to harm you. And so David's insistent, no, your father's trying to kill me. So Jonathan makes this arrangement with him and says, okay, you go away for 3 days, and when I got my father alone, I will inquire of him as to whether he wants to do you harm or not. And then I'll come to you in this predetermined place, and I'll give you a sign one way or the other what I have found out. And so we pick it up in verse 18, and then Jonathan said to David, tomorrow is the new moon, and you will be missed, because your seat will be empty. So we see here, it's just a brief mention, just a hey, a by the way sort of thing. I take this to and understand it to be, he's just like saying, I'm going to have to make up an excuse for your absence, because we're coming up on the celebration of the new moon, and we have our traditional dinner party where we get together and have the celebration. Now I have to make an excuse for you. So he's not saying good or bad, doesn't go on any more detail. He's just a sort of a by the way. So we see there's a form of celebration outside of the priesthood for the acknowledgement of the new moon. And I kind of as a form of celebration. I encourage people, if you can't come together like we are right now here in this place, if you do as I've done in the past, have a dinner party at home, say the prayers, blow the shofar, have fellowship. Any time you can get together and have food and fellowship is a good excuse to have food and fellowship, right? Yeah.
Could that even hint at a fixed calendar, since he's saying tomorrow's the new moon? How would they know tomorrow's the new moon?
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Just to repeat for those who didn't hear Facebook Live, the question was, could that imply a fixed calendar, since they knew tomorrow, like you said, tomorrow would be the new moon? And in the time that this was written, and when the temple was in use and in service, and there was the great Sanhedrin, it didn't follow as we do on a preset calendar per se. They knew the calculations and the time count. They knew the approaching time, and given the Nasi of the time, they would know his view on whether waxing, waning, or completely black. So there's a typical a 3-day span of when it can be determined. So I believe at the time it was still being reported that the new moon being sighted, and then it would be declared. But that being said, there's those 3 days where it could be. In one person's view, it's as the moon was disappearing and the last little bit of light could be seen. Then they considered that to be the transition and the change. Some considered after that point and it went completely black. There's nothing to be seen. And that's the time to declare the new moon and the change. And another, and kind of more what the calendar, set calendar kind of counts, is the appearance of the first rays of light off of the moon. So as it's coming into its new pattern, that it would be calculated. And I wasn't there, so I can't say for sure, but I believe that's how it went. That they knew that the moon cycled every 29 and a quarter or half, 29 and a half days. So they would know it was coming up. They would only be waiting for that declaration. All that being said as well, that there may have been over time, and depending on differing views, because we as people will have them, you can't get 3 people in a room without having 4 opinions on one subject. So there may have been times when the celebration would have been after the day of that declaration. So there would have been the service being held in the temple by the priesthood that day, and then that night they would have the lay people, so to speak, would have their celebration of the new moon. Again, I wasn't there. I can't say how it happened, just the possibilities. So. But the importance really goes beyond the fact that it was something God instituted, something He gave commandment to have certain things done for an observance, beyond a demonstration that people outside of the Levitical priesthood were making an acknowledgement of. And here's where the real justification for us now and in the future comes in participation in this. In the book of Isaiah, at the end of the book, in chapter 66 and verse 23, it says, "And it shall come to pass that from one new moon," that's today, "to another, and from one Sabbath to another, all flesh shall come and worship before me, says the Lord." And this is talking about, in its nearest time and perspective, for some view, this is the millennial. So this is the reign of the Lord. And for others, they view this as being the time after that. So this goes on and on. So even whether it's during the millennial reign, whether it's after, all things that were, are, and will be. So irregardless, this is something we should be doing because it's something we will be doing. Something that will be required, mandated for 1,000 years in the days soon to come, and probably beyond, and for all of eternity. And God doesn't change His mind. He doesn't put gaps in between stuff. When he said before, I'm initiating this is something for you to observe, he meant always, forever. And anyway, just the interpretation according to Maimonides. Feel free to disagree with me, sometimes I do. Yeah.
And even like with the rest of the Moedim, I mean, with the festivals, we can't actually do them in the way that's prescribed in the scriptures because there's no temple, but we're going to do them when Messiah returns.
That's right.
So why not practice now?
Yeah. And for those who didn't hear, his comment was that we cannot really keep the Moedim as prescribed. There's no temple. That's really what everything centers around. But we keep the memorial. We keep it alive for the day that it will be reinstituted in full. But it doesn't exclude us from doing any observance that we can't. We keep it alive. We keep its memory going. Just like in keeping the commandments, nobody can keep all the commandments. And it's not because we're flesh and incapable, but they don't all apply to us. But when it says for us to keep the commandments, it doesn't mean that we perform every one to its very detail. You know, I'm not a Levitical priest. I can't keep the commandments to the priest, but I can keep them in that I don't discard them. I don't say that they don't have to be done. So I keep and guard them in that way. In fact, even the word keep it makes me think back to the garden when God created the man and the woman and put them in the garden. He said, I want you to keep it. It's guard and protect it. So if we would think about the idea of keeping the commandments and all of them in that same respect that he means for us to treat them as we were to treat the guard and protect them. So, just my 2 cents. And again, feel free to disagree with me. Sometimes I do. So, going on this evening, will include a messianic prayer from the Psalms and a prayer of sanctification for the new moon. And we still have yet to get this put on the PowerPoint for those Facebook Living. So hopefully you've contacted the office to get your copy, or you have a Siddur and you can pull them out of there. We don't do all of them because we want to keep this in just a bare bones demonstration example and let you build your traditions in your house and your family your own way. I'm not saying this is the only way to do it. In fact, I never say in anything that I do and demonstrate, this is not the only way. Make it your own. You know, it's fine to learn from somebody and to do it to learn to get familiar. But if you're only doing what somebody else has instructed you or does, then you're living somebody else's faith. Now you can still do the same things, but if it isn't meaningful to you and it doesn't come from you, even if it's just those same things, then you're living somebody else's faith. And I think that that's a weak relationship with the Lord. Sorry, I don't mean to be condemning, but please, live your own faith and relationship with God. He wants it individual and personal. So the first aspect we're going to look at tonight about the month is Benjamin. And so we actually have 2 names here, Benoni and Benjamin. And we're going to look at those 2 names and how they came about and kind of get a few different ideas and perspectives about what's in this name or these names, because names have meaning and they're significant. So each one of the tribes of Israel, they're given their name. It was descriptive. It was meaningful. I know in our society we don't put much value really in a name besides that we like the way it sounds. So, but in God's economy, names have meaning and they're important. So we'll look at the meanings of the names here tonight, and hopefully then get a little better understanding of what's going on, what's being conveyed, and who these people are. So we see the account in Genesis 35:16 through 19. It says, then they journeyed from Bethel, and when there was but a little distance to go to Ephrath, Rachel labored in childbirth, and she had hard labor. Now it came to pass when she was in hard labor, that the midwife said to her, "Do not fear, you will have this son also." And so it was, as her soul was departing, for she died, that she called his name Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. So the first thing I want to point out here too, on the surface level, is to Rachel, her sorrow in this childbirth and giving him this name, her sorrow in that was that she would not live to raise him. Okay, that's one surface level perspective. And so for now, we're just going to go with that. And but to Jacob, instead of giving him that name of this son of my sorrow, he called him, one interpretation, translation, son of my right hand. Meaning from that he would be the one to raise him, that because his mother wasn't there, he would take on that responsibility. Traditionally, the mothers raised the children to a certain age, exclusively being their teachers, and then at a certain age, the father would take the son on to teach him how to be a man, basically. But one of the ways we can take what's being said here is that instead of passing him off onto one of his other wives to raise Benjamin, he declared that he himself would be active in raising his son Benjamin. So a little note I have here: Benjamin was the only one of the sons of Israel to be born in the promised land. And we see that in Genesis 32:22. It says, "And he arose that night and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed over the ford of Jabbok." They were en route in traveling to where they were going to go in the promised land when Rachel gave birth. So she left while she was pregnant, apparently, or it would seem. I don't know how long the journey took, but I take this to mean that she was very pregnant when they left Laban. But something happened along the way, sadly, that caused seems to have caused Rachel's death. And I want to caution, this is an example where we must be careful about what we speak, because as it's written, the power of life and death is in the tongue. And in Genesis 31:30 through 32, we read the account where Laban, Jacob's father-in-law, catches up with them, and after he's left with everybody, and it says that, "Now you have surely gone away because you greatly longed for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods?" Then Jacob answered and said to Laban, "Because I was afraid, for I said, perhaps you would take your daughters from me by force. With whomever you find your gods, do not let him live. In the presence of our brethren, identify what I have of yours and take it with you." For Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. I wonder, would he have been so cocky if he knew what Rachel had done in taking these? And so he made a declaration of death sentence upon any person possessing something that belonged to Laban. And so it brings up the question, something I want to look at for a minute here. Why would Rachel steal her father's false gods? And the sages, some of them say that the reason for this wasn't that she was still into the paganism, but that in the culture and the time, the people would go to their gods for information and stuff. So Rachel, in their fleeing from her father, did not want him to be able to go to his gods, inquire where they were in order to find them. So the sages say that she took them just so that he would not be able to do that. Not saying that they really had any power to speak to him, to tell him anything one way or another, but this was the mindset and the thought, and the sages think that was the reason for why she took them. She wasn't worshiping them. She wasn't still into paganism and all that stuff. So just take it or leave it. That's just kind of the take some of the sages present on that case. But now I want to look at the Hebrew of the names here to get a further possible understanding of what might be being said or implied in this, and hopefully expand a little bit on some perspective on those names. So Benoni in the Hebrew comes from two Strong's definitions that we can find in Hebrew definition 1121 for Ben, and Hebrew 205 where we're getting onai, the root of. But there's some things I have highlighted here I want to bring out in a little bit perspective, something I saw in my study in this and looking at the name and what she was declaring by giving him this name. So the definitions, there's multiples for this, but the ones I want to pull out here are not just the definition of son, which is on the surface level we can get from Ben, but old or first, tied with the following definition for onai, the root of it, iniquity, wickedness. We get the mourning and sorrow as a definition, so then we get the son of my sorrow, or son of my mourning. It's not one or the other I'm presenting here. I'm just saying here's another possible aspect within her declaring his name or what she called him, where we can see some tying aspects. And again, it's another thing, agree with me, don't agree with me, that's fine. But this is kind of some of the things I think some of the sages got to, as well as I did, in leading to the understanding about what I shared about her taking the gods situation and the declaration of death, as it was, you can see sort of a confession in this of that event, and how the events of this death and childbirth can be tied into that event through this name. And so her first wickedness or mischief, iniquity, what was that we're given? I mean, well, not say she lived a sinless life, but as far as from what we can see, what was her old first this wickedness or mischief that she was engaged in that caused her death. And we also see that it can also, we have the definition of idol. And now all these definitions, and I've removed them from here, all have had their time of interpretation from this word within Scripture. So these aren't vague figurative possibilities. These are applications that were used in translation. So they're viable potential translations of the word. I'm not saying that's the proper use and interpretation here. I'm just saying maybe we can expand our thoughts and understanding by looking at more of the possibilities. And so we do the same thing with Benjamin, and of course we get son from this definition. And in this case, first doesn't really apply to the order of the birth. He is the last of 12. He's also not the first son of his mother. So in that respect, in that order, doesn't really apply. But it does apply in a way that connects with the other words. So where we get yamin can be, we see here hand, right, we get right hand. We also get side and south are uses for definition of this word, which is a little ironic. Think about the temple and how it was situated. And when the Lord was enthroned in the temple and he faced east, the south was to his right side. So we're still seeing this same application here. So we're still seeing the south on the side, the right side from his right hand. And so this is all applicable use of this. So possibly one way we can understand this in giving of his names Benjamin, he's also the first from the south. And remember, they left the north, where all the 11 sons were born, and came into the promised land. They came south. So he's the son of the south, the first of the south, in that respect. So then that's kind of some of the justification from the naming, where we get like a second witness, if you will, in this case, to him being the only one, the first one born in the promised land. Although we have it specifically spelled out in the scripture where it says that they were there in the land. Here's with everything in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, let everything be established. So that's, we can look at this as being the second witness, if you will, in his name, calling him the first of the south, or the son of the south. So anyway, again, feel free to disagree with me. I sometimes do. Another aspect of the month is bearing and raising, and it again comes from what we talked about in Jacob being the one to take on firsthand the raising of this son. I don't mean to imply that he didn't have any help, because Lord knows single parenting is not an easy way to go, and he had help on hand. So I don't want to spend too much time rehashing this one. We'll keep this brief. Just refer to the notes if you'd like, if you want to know more about the bearing and raising. Before we do go, there's just one thing make mention of here. There's a bit in the notes here that talks about something from the Talmud that the sages say about that they connect with the bearing and raising aspect. I don't necessarily agree with their take on it, but then neither again do all of the sages agree. So even included in the notes is the fact that there's a disagreement about what's being presented, about the idea that that the parents receive merit from their children and not the children from the parents. So, and all of this covers kind of that. So the next aspect I want to actually look into is darkness and light. So the month of Kislev includes the start and the finish of the Maccabean revolt. We're about to come into the celebration of that occasion of Hanukkah. It was in the month of Kislev that it all first began, when the temple was desecrated, and then 3 years later again rededicated. That happened here in this month. And it was some of the things we've got here in the notes to look at and consider in this aspect of darkness and light, and the battle going on between darkness and light in the sense of the Hanukkah event, and about Hellenism's attempt to assimilate the Jewish people in. There were 3 principal prohibitions that they imposed upon the Jewish people that they tried to make them separate from as a way of changing their identity. If they could get them to cease from these 3 things, then it was believed that then they would just fall into assimilation, and their personal identity as the people of God would disappear. And one of those is Rosh Codesh. This is because the new moon is representative of the nation of Israel being restored and growing after being eclipsed for a time, which is a part of the prayers we'll say tonight. The people would hold on to the hope that a future generation would be reborn again. And so by eliminating the celebration of Rosh Codesh, that they would sever that thought and connection, that though they may be diminished or eclipsed for a time, that they would then come back into to being a shining light, a reflection of God. Yeah.
I think also with the elimination of Rosh Chodesh, they would lose the calendar, which in turn they would lose all the festivals.
Exactly. Yeah. If they could, what he said is if they lose Rosh Chodesh, they lose all the festivals, which is true. If we don't acknowledge the first of the month, then you don't know when the rest of the celebrations are. And you can't, most of them are within the middle of the month. And until you know when the beginning of the month is, you'll never find the middle of it. So, so there's that. Another that they tried to eliminate was circumcision. By preventing the chain of participation in the covenant for the land handed down to the children of Israel through Abraham to the Messiah and forever, the identity of separation from the nations and being a holy nation of priests to their God would be lost. So severing the identity that they had to a homeland would help in the idea of assimilation. They wouldn't be connected to any specific place anymore, and that they would just take on the identity of the land that they were in, which has never been successful, no matter where the Jewish people have gone. The desire, even over the last 2,000 years, that they had been separated from the land, never died. Generation after generation after generation still hoped for a return to a land that they, for generations, never even knew. Another is the Shabbos, all the Sabbath festivals, which we just talked about, that without the recognition of the new moon, they wouldn't be able to keep those Sabbaths festivals either, but the weekly Sabbath as well extended if they were to cease from acknowledging that, which in turn then would sever their acknowledgement of the Lord as God. So then if they weren't observing the basic tenets of God, then they would be able to then take on the belief and following of any God. So, just a little note in this, there's I've got down here, Yeshua had made a comment in talking about the perpetuation of the generations and the Lord being the God of the living and not the God of the dead. And in Matthew 22:31 and 32, he says, "Have you not read what was spoken to you by God, saying, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob? God is not the God of the dead, but of the living." That's not trying to say that he's not the God of Abraham, because Abraham had died. He's just saying it's not a past. He's not the God of somebody else. He's the God of every generation that perpetuates, it goes on. Claim him as your God. Not, well, he was the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yes, but he's also your God. So according to Mark Maimonides, there's a suggestion that the Lord could be referred to as the God of Abraham, Moses, and Yeshua, the Messiah who lives forever. So the perpetuation in that way. So we acknowledge him in that sense, that he's the God of Yeshua, who, though he died, he lives again and never dies. So then he's never the God of the dead. He's never just the God of someone who's passed and gone on. So just one thought. And finally, I believe this is the last aspect that we're going to look at, and then we can move on with just food and fellowship after the prayers, is the rainbow. So the rainbow is significant in this month. The sages connect the rainbow to the month of Kislev for a variety of reasons. The fact that the rains of the flood stopped in the month of Kislev, we get that from Genesis 7, 11, and 12. It says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on the day all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. So this is not the second month. And if you're counting by the calendar, you'll know we count this as, what month is this now? So this would be the ninth month, right? Because counting Tishri, which used to be the first month, and that's when you have to know when the balance of the time count took effect. So in the time of Noah, Tishri was the first month, and so the rains began in the second month, as it says here, second month on the 17th day of the month. So 17th day of last month, is when the rains began, and they rained for 40 days, which brings us to the 27th of Kislev. So the 27th of this month is when the rains ceased, and so the sages attribute the rainbow to this month because it was after the rain ceased that God gave the promise of the rainbow. So there's that connection. Okay, they also, the sages have also ascribed some aspects to the colors. And so sages teach that the rainbow represents in society and in the different levels of closeness to God, as the colors of the rainbow differ due to their closeness to the light. Red being the closest and violet being the furthest, but still refracting light and not in darkness, with others combined form the pure white light that we know of. So I suggest that the concept could be also applied to us individually, as the rainbow is the 7 divisions of light. They can represent 7 areas of our life where we are to reflect the light of God. And so I want to cover some of those areas, and these are not definitive. These are just my perspective and how I see where we could break this down for our own personal lives, where the sages broke it down for a society, and how that each area of society would be represented by a different color depending upon their closeness to God. We can break our lives down in these color aspects and how we reflect the light of God in our relationship with Him and to the world. So red would attribute this to our Torah study, orange to our prayer, yellow the mitzvot and commandments and how we keep them, green would be our family, blue our community involvement, indigo our work life and interaction, and violet is our private alone time. And so in all of these aspects, to some degree, whether it's great or little, we want to be mindful to reflect the light of God, to be maybe even in one respect as like the moon, a reflection of the greater light. So, as Israel is described to being as a nation, like the moon, a reflection of the greater light of God. So let us also as well be like that and be lights of God. So in closing, we're just going to cover a few brief things of history. This is not exhaustive. This is just a few things to kind of whet your appetite on looking at what is all involved in the month of Kislev and what's the history of the month. In this month, Zechariah received prophecies on the 3rd and the 4th. Reuben is born in this month on the 14th. Ezra scolds the people for having pagan wives on the 20th of this month. Of course, we already mentioned the Maccabean revolt and the restoration of the temple rededication. Yeshua is in the temple for Hanukkah in this month. And the flood rains cease on the 27th of Kislev, as we just mentioned. So, now that concludes this part, and we will could say Hag Sameach and recite the blessings. You should have with you a copy of the prayers and the blessing. And we'll stand and recite these together. And then if you have one, when we conclude with the blessings, blow the shofar to welcome in the new moon. Messianic prayer from the Psalms. Together, praise the Lord. Praise the Lord from the heavens. Praise Him in the heights. Praise all His angels. Praise Him, all His hosts. Praise Him, sun and moon. Praise Him, all stars of light. Praise Him, highest heavens, and the waters above the heavens. Let them praise the name of the Lord, for He has commanded and they were created. He has also established them forever and ever. He has made a decree which will not pass away. Blessed are you, O Lord, our God, King of the universe, who created the heavens by your command, and all their hosts by your mere word. You have subjected them to fixed laws and times, so that they do not deviate from their set function. They are happy to do the will of their Creator. May we be like the sun, moon, and stars in this regard. Like the moon, the history of your people has assumed a variety of phases. Like the moon, your people have waxed and waned, yet we are still alive. Like the moon, we always reappear, even after being eclipsed for a time. God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Lord of creation, may you protect your children, the children of the covenant made with Abraham, and the children of the new covenant made through Messiah Yeshua. This new month of Kislev, as it is written, the Lord is your keeper. The sun will not smite you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will protect you from all evil. You will order the moon to renew itself over those you sustain from birth, who likewise will be regenerated in the future. Blessed are you, O Lord, who renews the months. Amen. Prayer for the sanctification of the new moon. May it be thy will, Lord our God, and God of our fathers, that you bring for us this month for good and for blessing. May you give to us long life, a life of peace, a life of goodness, a life of blessing, a life of substance, a life of physical health, a life in which there is fear of heaven and fear of sin, a life in which there is no shame or humiliation, a life of wealth and honor, a life in which we love Torah and fear God, a life in which the Lord fulfills the requests of our hearts for good. Amen. Time to blow the shofar. Thank you. Let's close with one more prayer. Father, again, we give thanks to you for this day that you have made. We thank you for being with us, for bringing us together, and for fellowshipping with us here and wherever we go. We just ask that you would continue with us, bring us closer to you day by day, in Yeshua's name. Amen.
Good.
I think we were sideways for a while.